will not bow down.
Let my people go.
We will not bow down.
Let my people go.
We will not bow down.
Let my people go.
We will not bow down.
Let my people go.
We will not bow down.
Let my people go.
Hello and welcome to episode 17 of the Croydon Constitutionalist podcast, bringing classical liberalism to South London and beyond via YouTube, Stitcher and the Apple Podcasts. My name is Dan Heaton and I have two guests with me today. I have my usual co-host Mike Swaddling from the Croydon Constitutionalists.
Hello there.
And we also have honoured guest today of Tim Duce, who is a musician who you will have listened to some of his works because he's kindly provided us with the music for the intro that you've just listened to. Mike, it's been over a year now since we did our first podcast. How do you think it's been going?
It's been good. Slowly building up listeners, people commenting on the podcasts, chance to expand on what's going on politics in Croydon and beyond. And it's really good to get that professionalism added to them. Not that we aren't wildly professional, Dan. Sorry, I wouldn't intimate otherwise. But top and tail with some music, I think it's really made a difference.
Absolutely, yeah. It's been commented upon that it's say professionalised, but also just really enhanced the intro and the outro and brought something new to it. And so thank you very much, Tim, for providing us with that music. So we're talking with Tim here today to obviously thanking him for providing us with that music. So Tim, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and how you've got involved in music over many years and what your background is.
Okay. Well, getting involved in music, my earliest memory is a musical memory, and that is the thing that inspired me from the very beginning and made me always want to do that. And had a little bit of a strange start in life, and I ended up it seemed like everything was pushing me away from being able to be in music, although it was actually what I really, really wanted to do more than anything. And it was only by the time I'd really finished university that I woke up one morning and thought I had this flash where I suddenly realised I'd done everything in my life at that point to suit somebody else, what somebody else wanted. And I thought, it's about time I did what I wanted. And that's really when I started doing it seriously, and I've been doing it ever since. So there you go.
So do you work in the music industry?
Well, I have done a lot and worked professionally as a player and so on. I'm now in a position which can be exciting and thrilling and incredibly miserable as well, because quite often you end up doing all kinds of things that you don't really want to do, but it pays or whatever, so you do it. And then my wife and I sort of stumbled accidentally upon a sort of health and nutrition business, which we've done ever since, and that was lovely. It's very, very liberating, because it meant then I could just do the music I wanted to do, and so that's what I do. So I'm a player, and performer, but I'm a songwriter. That's that's probably the most important thing to me, I think, and so I've got free rein to be able to do that. So I do that an awful lot, and as you can see, I get inspiration to do all kinds of things, and this is just one of them.
I think that probably brings us onto it, doesn't it? So that the music that we play here is called "We Will Not Bow Down." What inspired you to do that? What was the background to that piece of music?
Oh, right. Well, that's one that's been a sleeper. As you know, I mean, we've been snowed with relentless pro-EU propaganda for 50 years, and it's actually got more relentless since the referendum. And but those occasional little bits of leave information have kind of come through from time to time. The guy who started it, of course, was Sir James Goldsmith. when he did that campaign where he sent videos round to like a third of UK households, and one came through my door, and it was fantastic because, you know, it was like, oh, somebody else thinks like I do. Somebody else has noticed this. Somebody else noticed that this didn't make sense. That didn't make sense. That they told us that this week, but they told us something else the next week, and so on and so on. All the kind of nasty smells that I've been detecting for a very long time suddenly started to add up, and that was just absolutely brilliant. And he caused quite a stir there, and really we are benefiting from his legacy. I mean, bless the man's heart. I mean, he was dying of cancer at the time. He had nothing to gain politically. It cost him 10 million quid, which was an awful lot of money back in those days. Not a lot of money now. Yeah. And but a fortune back then. And it was his dying, it was his legacy to the country, knowing that, you know, he didn't have long to live. But by doing that, by doing what he did, basically he awoke a sleeping giant. People across the United Kingdom woke up and thought, blimey, of course, it all makes sense now. You know, that suddenly all the dots join up. I can see what's going on. And really, it's been like that ever since. It was because of him, of course. Well, of course, then we didn't have a referendum. People were clamouring for a referendum for decades. The governments of the time would never allow it because they knew they'd lose it. And it was only when David Cameron opened his mouth too wide and promised a referendum and then didn't deliver it in the next period of government that he had, and then he was finally called out on it, you know, after that, and so they really were stuck. Well, you know, they tried to rig it by giving 9 million quid to Remain of taxpayers' money. They tried to rig it by at the last minute putting back the date by which you had to be registered to vote at the same time as Remain put out this scurrilous rumour that everybody who voted Leave was a rabid fascist nutcase. They did everything they could to rig it, but of course, as you know, we won in the referendum, and I'm so glad we did. But anyway, getting back, I'm a long way around your question, isn't it? Coming back to it, basically, that song, that, you know, that "We Will Not Bow Down" idea actually came to me right back then. At the time of Sir James Goldsmith was doing his thing, and it had kind of it was just an idea that had sat basically in a drawer and in the back of my mind ever since. And it was only when you said, "Well, you could do some music for us," and I thought, I don't know, I could do something. And I suddenly remembered. I thought, oh yeah, actually, as it happens, you know, I remember this. So then, when I wrote it, by the way, I wrote it as a whole song. It's got verses and all this kind of stuff in it. But of course, you just wanted it as an intro and outro for the podcast. So I thought, well, I'll make it much more sort of repetitive. Really, basically, that we will not bow down. Then I started doing it. Oh, and they let my people go like. I thought, oh, biblical. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that sort of just came to me, you know. And so, oh, well, yeah, I'll go in there. And and you got it there, and that's what you got.
The Exodus reference.
Oh, definitely,
fantastic.
Definitely a bit of that. Definitely a bit of that.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly. You say you came up with the idea some time ago.
Yeah.
But I think
20 or 30 years. Long time.
It must be.
Yeah.
So I think the referendum party was the '97 election.
Mm.
And what he was arguing for was that there should have to be a referendum where they were going to try to get us to join the euro at that time.
Yeah.
And to be fair, he was successful in that because they promised that they would. Now, whether we now would believe their promises is another matter. But there you go. But I think the song, which was good at the time, relevant at the time, I think it's been even more relevant now over the last few years. Yeah. When we've actually told them what we think. Yes. And they've just been trying to block us every step of the way. Yes. So I think it's really really resonates with us, I think, and no doubt with all of our listeners.
Yeah.
Just kind of, you mentioned the £9 million leaflet, and I always thought that was the great mistake during the referendum of the government, was only spending £9 million on that leaflet.
Yeah.
£9 million is a number most of us can get our head round. You know, if you peer out your front door and you look at the houses across the road, they're probably worth in total number you can see about £9 million. It's a lot of money, but it's something that's not beyond the realms of imagination for most of us. If they'd spent £9 billion, no one would have grasped it in the same way. And I know we found when we were doing the street stalls over the referendum, real resentment at that £9 million. After that first came out, there was a queue of people that following Saturday sort of coming up and saying how angry they were at the money that was spent. And it's
well, it was the principle. This is the principle,
Absolutely.
isn't it? I mean, is it supposed to be a democracy or not? Is it supposed to be an even playing field or not? Are people supposed to be allowed to make up their own minds or not? You know, and clearly that wasn't the case. And they thought they had it in the bag, and because of their sort of insular bubble of self-righteousness, and then Leave was something like about 15 points ahead or something. It was about a week before the referendum, and this guy Duncan I was campaigning with, and he said, I just can't believe this kind of like all this deception that's going. I said, but trust me, it's gonna get worse. Yeah. It's gonna get far worse now as we, 15 points behind. They're 15 points behind. We're coming into the last week, and of course it did. That's where they really sort of, that's where it really got shameless. And I thought actually they were gonna tip it, and they nearly did, but yeah, amazingly enough, we're still 4 points clear.
And the bubble, we're speaking here just after the general election in 2019. The bubble aren't we just seeing that repeated again? This sort of refusing to believe reality, and it is that, and it's a very, very interesting point, and this is a very, very interesting point about all this. You can see it. A perfect example of it. Actually, if you go on YouTube, there's a heavyweight contest between Nigel Farage and Tony Blair, and it's really fascinating because it just typifies everything about Remain and Leave and the people who are Remainers and are Leavers. Because Nigel weighs in straight away. He comes out of his corner, jabbing away. And he's and of course typical Nigel. He's done all his homework, and it's like fact. He's bringing it down. He's on about the democratic deficit, the failure of the euro, the economic woes of the EU, and the unaccountability, and the slush fund 4% or whatever it is of the total EU cash that actually disappears every year, and nobody knows where it went, and all this kind of stuff that's going on. And he's brilliant, and he just doles it all out one after the other. And then of course it's time for Tony to reply. Tony, of course, as you know, is a very smooth political operator too. But and so what does he do? He doesn't refute one single fact, because of course he can't. But instead, so clever, he sort of shrugs, he smiles, he says, well, and in that way that Teflon Tony does. And he says, and of course he takes this line that basically, there they are, in this noble cause, that they're trying to make the world a better place. And of course there will be detractors, and yes, they haven't got to that utopian perfection point yet, but they're trying. And and it takes this line. And of course, if you're watching it, if you're the sort of person who believes in facts, believes in reality, and believes in getting it right, you'd say Nigel's won the day. If you're a sort of person who prefers beliefs, prefers to be right rather than trying to get it right, and prefers not to look too deeply at things, yes, you would believe that Tony had won the day, and that very much sums the difference. That difference between people making decisions based on facts, people making decisions based on beliefs, and that really, which is why I think Leavers and Remainers are very, very different animals.
But what's fascinating is that in this recent election, it became very the options were very clearly polarised. The Tories did their "Let's get Brexit done," and the Lib Dems thought that they were going to kill it with by rebranding themselves as Lib Dems to Stop Brexit, and they really thought this was going to be their moment in the sun, when they were going to become the important party again, and they got absolutely slaughtered.
It's fascinating there, isn't it? There's, and I don't know what the number is, but there's a million people who could have voted Lib Dem, probably voted Remain, probably all voted Remain, could have voted Lib Dem and rejected their Stop Brexit message. And, you know, the Lib Dems should have done, given how terrible Corbyn is.
They should have cleaned up.
They should have done substantially better than they did.
Why do you think they did so badly?
I think there's it. What's really shown in this election is the difference between the people who voted Remain and people who are still Ramoning. And the Lib Dems thought that everyone that voted Remain was still Ramoning like they were.
Yes.
And it absolutely proved not to be the case.
No, that's a very good point, because I was a little bit glib there and talking about Remainers and Leavers, because of course there is a difference, and that is the difference between people who voted Remain at the time because that was really all they knew, and so they just thought it was a good idea, and people who are actually dyed-in-the-wool, emotional, never say die Remainers. They are a different group, and so yes, a lot of those who just voted Remain at the time, I don't mean to be mean, but I mean, they didn't know any better. I mean, let's face it, after 50 years of non-stop propaganda, it was no surprise that many people voted Remain. But they've clearly, been exposed to more information since that time, and a good thing too. Probably a lot of it due to this podcast and other things like it.
Yeah, I think when you said people have different beliefs, and some people do believe in like a world government or regional government, or as you say, sort of utopian type ideas.
Yes.
And I don't mind that.
No.
Necessarily. I'm not one of those people, but some people are like that. But I think and perhaps they therefore voted Remain in the referendum, but it's this hardcore of people who, and I think they could probably fall into three camps: as the Remainers, the 48% of people, if you want to call everybody that as a Remainer. But then you've got another group of people who are Remoaners, and they're sort of on a sliding scale, through to the absolute Remainiacs, such as Anna Soubry and the Chuka Mooners and whoever. But I know plenty of people who voted Remain, who were quite sensible people, and who were prepared to take it on the chin, and accept democracy. And then there were the Remoaners who. Kind of dug their heels in a bit, or just make funny remarks a lot. But they're obviously after time they're kind of beginning to get over it, and they're going to have to get over it now. And then there's that small clique of Remainiacs who I don't know. They just need to. They're going to have to get over it now. So
it's sort of interesting seeing the election result and what we've only seen for the referendum. And I don't know, and I don't know why almost, but. We've seen from the general election we've just had, there were a few hundred people out in the streets of London on the Friday night. I believe there was gatherings of 100 in a couple of other major cities. Let's call it 1,000 people. Clearly that means there were millions and millions and millions of people who voted for not Conservative and accepted the general election result. Haven't felt the need to protest. I don't see people saying, well, you must replace this MP. We can't let the new MP stand here. It was a campaign of lies, therefore we won't honour the result. I mean, you get the odd nutter on Twitter, but generally that's not happening. Broadly, people have accepted the result of the election.
Yes.
It's fascinating to me still now how many people and clearly what we said, most people did, but how many people aren't accepting the result of the referendum still? It was the same thing.
Yes.
You went into a polling station,
Yes.
you put your X on a box,
Yes.
and they got counted.
Yes.
But yeah, beyond their capability to accept so
Well,
many.
that's the belief is an interesting thing. I mean, look at John Major. I mean, John Major as Chancellor under Margaret Thatcher was shadowing the euro as shadowing the Deutschmark as a precursor to the euro, which caused a massive boom and bust. Put a load of people onto the street when they lost their mortgages. It was absolutely shameful and appalling. Did it again in the with the ERM. And the same appalling results, and then of course lost power as a result of it, and that was all part of his sort of Euro obsession. He and Heseltine and Hurd and that sort of gang who chucked Margaret out. I've never been a great Margaret Thatcher fan, but give the girl her due. She did wake up one day and realise that half her cabinet and the Foreign Office had been hoodwinking her, and she suddenly realised, it was time to look for the exit at the time, that's why they got rid of her. But anyway, after all that, and it even cost him his job, and here he is. And a couple of decades later, and he's still 100% dedicated Europhile. Well, yeah. I mean, that isn't belief over reality. I really don't know what it is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. During that day, I heard Michael Portillo, who was Chief Secretary of the Treasury, I think during the ERM crisis.
Yeah.
It was something on This Week some years ago, and he mentioned that he was there as they're in the room talking about, well, if we need to put interest rates up to 20% or 25%, we'll do that.
We'll do it.
And he'd reported, and he wasn't the only one, saying, hang on, that's another 1 million people out of home.
Yes.
And they were but we need to stay in the ERM.
They didn't give a damn.
No.
They didn't give a damn. The end justifies... It's always the end justifies the means. Even Tony Blair in this... in that confrontation with Nigel Farage that I described earlier. I mean, basically, the story he was telling was basically, we are right, so therefore we can get away with anything, because again, the end justifies the means. It was like fascism with a human face, fascism with charm.
It's inevitable.
It's inevitable.
It's an inevitable progress of history. You're going to end up here, whether it takes 5 years or 10 years, we're going in that direction. Yeah. And just, there's nothing you can do to stop it, little people.
It's inevitable. I mean, it really is just so, it's so fascistic. It's horrible. It's very, very... That was the main reason why, I took this down. I just find it so horrific. And you've got to have a sense of humour about all this, because when you look back on when Remain spun that story that, that all Leavers were these sort of gaga raving fascist National Front voting nutcases and so on, and got a load of young people who frankly knew nothing about politics, because they're at university. What are you at university for? Drinking, smoking, and getting laid. It's not and a little bit of study here and there. And I went there. I know. I've been there. They were okay. So they suddenly turned out to vote, and as we know, it nearly swung the referendum. But there they were, these people going to the poll, to save this country from a fascist takeover. And of course, that's exactly what they were voting for. You couldn't make it up, really. It's so comical.
No, it completely is. It's this idea that the shocking, terrible idea that we will localise democracy and actually have a democracy.
Yes.
What we need to do is give all the power to someone over we can't vote for,
yes,
and is as far away from us as possible. That's the future. That's the right thing to do.
Yes.
How abhorrent.
Yes.
That goes against everything in history.
And somehow it's going to be wonderful.
Yeah.
It's going to be wonderful because they're bringing people together. it's an end to war. It's all, and here's a thing I've used a couple of times. It's just for my own amusement, shocking really. But I'll be talking with a died in the war remain. It's happened a couple of times. We've all been there. And I said, well, let me ask you a quick question, just a snap little question, just like that. How far would you trust most politicians? And they go, well, I wouldn't trust them very far. Politicians, I wouldn't trust them as far as I could throw. And I said, good answer, yeah. How far would you trust a politician from the European Commission? Oh, well, that's different.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
There's a bunch of people you don't even know their names. They're so shadowy. They're unelected. They're completely unaccountable. You've got no redress. They can do what the heck they want to you. That is the power of propaganda. That is how the result of non-stop propaganda. Fascinating, to see it.
So you mentioned you've had these discussions with Remainers in recent years. Obviously, you're involved heavily in the music and the arts world.
Yes.
We're told
Yeah.
that it's heavily pro-Remain and very left-wing and what have you. And obviously, I'm sure the Act to You grant is being thanked a lot by the candidates that he tried to help during the general election, all of whom lost.
Yes.
But there's an example there. So, see, what's it been like to be in the music and artistic world?
Yeah, you can't
as a
talk
Brexiteer?
about it very much. Really, the arts world, by its very nature, is not terribly big on analysis and finding pragmatic solutions to problems. And art shouldn't be. Art's about expression, and a good thing too. And all right. I did an experimental science degree, so I've learned to be able to swap my brain around from one kind of extreme to the other. But that's not that common, really. What tends to happen is, I think there's a lot of people in the arts world. It's just like everywhere else. Just if you look at just the ordinary world over the past, these past 3.5 years, we've found that the Remoaners have been extremely vocal, and Leavers are really generally pretty quiet, or generally don't. There's no money for them to promote their views. Of course, there's £100 million of UK taxpayers' money is being spent every week on the buying of opinion. Like the CBI, will tell you that, we've got to stay in the EU, and they'll tell you that all the time. Well, why? Because they're funded by the
Absolutely.
EU. So all this sort of thing is going on. That those voices are always going to be very loud. And then you come to this election, and people wanted a second referendum. Well, guess what? They've just had it, where as we said, the Lib Dems, Lib Dems to stop Brexit. Where are you? Come and vote for us. We'll vote tactically. We'll do it. And guess what? They got slaughtered. So the same thing is going on in the arts world. There's a lot of people who think that we'd be a damn sight better off leaving, and of course don't say anything. And you don't want to get in arguments with people. There's also as I said, in the arts world, people being artistic, there's a tendency not necessarily to be that analytical, not to be terribly bothered with facts, more bothered with, excited by sort of beliefs and nice sounding ideas. And also, of course, there's another aspect of it that in the arts world, it's always very important to be nice, and to let everybody know how nice you are. And even though we also know that the arts world has got some of the most appalling people, the arts, music business, theatre business, has got some of the worst people that you could ever hope not to meet in there. But lovely, everyone's is actually being terribly, 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 terribly nice. and so virtue signalling does tend to be even more apparent, even more apparent than in the non-arts world. So there's a lot of that really, but you just sort of accept it and go on.
Do you think you've lost any friends or colleagues or work? How's it?
Yeah, I've lost a couple, and lost a little bit of work. Nothing substantial, really. But yeah, they, and in that way that the sort of Remainers who get. Yes, they're very, very excited, very emotional, very curmudgeonly. But I don't worry about it too much. Some people could say, well, look, the smart thing to do is if you're in the entertainment business, don't talk about politics at all. A lot of people would say that, and yeah, they're probably right actually. But then again, I'm not that kind of person really. I do believe in doing your research. I do believe in doing the work. I don't believe in being right. I believe in trying to get things right. I do believe in looking and amending your views and being able to form conclusions on the most information that you can get available. And here we are. This is the age of information. Google's here. You can. All you've got to do is go into Google and this brings me on to the next thing. Yes, what are we going to? Which is like what's going to happen in 2020. All you've got to do is go into Google, and you'll find that the United States, China, and India, the three biggest economies in the entire world, are trading with the EU without a deal. And you've only got to go for a toddle around, do your shopping, go for a little toddle around Lidl, and you'll see prawns from Thailand. Thailand is the EU does almost as much trade with Thailand as it does with China. A huge amount of trade, and they haven't got a deal. Now, of course, they're working on getting a deal. Everybody would like a deal. A deal's the icing on the cake. But where Remain have been very clever over the last 3 years, of course, is not saying that a deal is the icing on the cake. They've been selling the idea that the deal is the cake, icing, candles and all, and this idea that, without a deal you can't trade and you're just going to die. Of course, it's absolute nonsense. More trade goes on in the world without trade deals than with trade deals, of course, by WTO. WTO's been given a right slagging by Remain. Nobody seems to have noticed that the World Trade Organization has probably been created to promote world trade. That's actually its job, to make world trade easy. And also, of course, there's this thing nobody's mentioned, and that is that, about 42% of our trade is with the EU every year. So that means 58% of our trade isn't with the EU. So 58% of our trade is actually being conducted with no deal with the rest of the world right now. So when it comes to, can we operate with no deal? Well, of course we can. And that was actually what we voted for. And this whole business about no deal and all that kind of thing, and it's just so awful and it's Armageddon and we mustn't go there, is simply the excuse that majority of Remain MPs used to block Brexit for 3.5 years. And of course, I'm glad to say they can't do that anymore. Now, what's Boris going to do? Now, of course, the first rule of negotiation is you never, never, never sit down at a negotiating table unless you are perfectly willing to walk away empty-handed. Because if you don't, they'll nail you to the floor. And certainly that's why no deal is so important. We need to be absolutely prepared to leave with no deal and manage perfectly well, thank you very much. And when we're like that, of course, then you are actually likely to be offered a deal, simply because it's we have a negative balance of payments with the EU. They export far more to us than we do to them. Not having a deal is far more hurtful and painful to them than it is to us. And in fact, we are the biggest export market of the other EU member states. So yes, they would want one in double quick time. But at the moment, actually, I feel for them, they can't offer us a deal. The last thing they can do is offer us a decent deal right now, because if they offer us a great deal for leaving, a whole load of other people are going to want to leave. So that's very important, I think, to go through that transition to actually leave, to leave without a deal, to function in that way. Then everything is going to come round the way we want it to go. But you've got to do it in that order.
It's funny you mentioned about WTO terms. This is a comment I often make in these sort of events, and this is being recorded on an iPhone that's produced in China using American technology, and I brought it in a shop in Britain. Those are 3 countries trading with each other on WTO terms.
Yes.
And listeners, we can assure you this physically is in front of us right now. It's not a figment of our imagination.
You can hear,
That's me tapping on it. It does exist. You mentioned there the method of exiting, and it strikes me, Boris, or it's been rumoured as we record this, that Boris is going to put forward in the Brexit bill that Parliament can't extend the transition period any further and put that into the law. Don't know quite what will happen. That will pan out over the next few days and weeks. But it strikes me, if that does happen, what the ground shift that's changed now is that the EU, I think in January, we're going to come back with a Norway deal, a Norway kind of, here's how you stay part of the EU without really actually being part of the EU.
Yeah.
And Boris has now changed that to, I want a Canada Plus situation. And that's, a true free trade deal that doesn't inhibit deals with the US, Korea, China, whatever else. And that's what Theresa May never got.
No.
And
she couldn't, She couldn't, and she was being undermined by the Remain MPs, just as of course as Boris was. I mean, it's been fantastic. Really, it's been such a sort of grappling match. As the way, what was the name of that Gina Miller? The way she dragged up some piece of archaic legislation from 400 years ago. So that Cabinet couldn't make the decision, Parliament would make the decision. Of course, they knew that they got the majority in Parliament, so that was how they managed to block things. And she put it in front of 3 judges, at least one of them who'd written some paper all about the implementation of EU law in the UK. So I mean, there were hardly an impartial bunch of judges. So she got that one in, and then of course that had Theresa May by the throat, and. She tried to have an election herself to try to get a decent majority. That was a time when these Labour MPs, I'm not saying who, but some of them actually put out this scurrilous story that they were going to make tertiary education free again and pay back all the people who paid for university. Yes. And which was absolutely shocking to come out with that. And out of that, they swung it. And of course, her majority reduced, so she was in real big trouble. And then we see Boris. Now, Boris didn't have a chance of getting in to be head of the Conservative Party, but then Nigel Farage, as usual, from outside, and that guy is an operator, created a Brexit Party. In 3 weeks, got this massive showing, even with no infrastructure on the ground, which meant that then. That was such a massive showing that then Boris was able to go to everybody else in the Conservative Party and say, do you want to keep your job? Because basically, unless you vote me in and unless I take over and unless we work with this thing, what's going to happen is the next election the Conservative Party will disappear and the Brexit Party will become the number one party in the UK. So that got him into that position. Then he was still being outvoted by all these Remain MPs, and you had to have 2/3 of a majority before you to agree before you could have an election, and they were stopping that happening. They were just paralysing the country and were happy to do so forever just to suit themselves. God knows how much damage they've done to this economy. Don't get me started on that. But then there's the final sort of clincher in this. It's such a drama. It's an absolutely, it's a cliffhanger, because at that point then, the Lib Dems, of course, firmly believed that if they did a Lib Dems against Brexit thing, that they would win. And there's Boris determined to win. So he was actually able to do a deal with the enemy and use a just parliamentary majority to change the law that you had to have a 2/3 majority for an election. So having done that, then was able to, with a regular majority, to call an election, and then we had it, and then we see what's just happened. But I mean, this thing has been, it's been incredible.
Well, it's been crazy, and one thing which is easy to forget in amongst all of this is, of course, the Supreme Court decided to just change the law. They overruled the rights of prorogation.
But please give us.
So basically, the Queen, on the advice of the Prime Minister, is completely entitled to stop Parliament, to prorogue Parliament for any period of time, pretty much they want to.
Yeah,
it's normally done for a period before an election.
Yes,
almost happens every year, in fact, because you have a Queen's speech almost every year. They were going to do it for, I think, was it 7 weeks or 5 weeks?
Yes.
Something like that.
Did it include a period for the...
But 3 or 4 of those weeks were going to be when Parliament wasn't going to be sitting anyway. They were going to, because of the conferences.
Yes.
And basically, the English court laughed at the suggestion that they couldn't do that, because you can. They went to Scottish court. The Scottish court decided, well, no, you can't, because we're Scottish and we're going to decide whatever it is
we want
under our Latin law of some description. Yeah. So the whole thing was appealed to the Supreme Court, where every single one of them, unanimous verdict, changed the law to say this prorogation is illegal. Now, bear in mind, only a week or so earlier, the 3 highest court judges in the land, in England, had said we can't even judge on this. So they made up the law that they could, and they made up the law. Then, having made up the law that they could, they said, well, so if we can make up the law, if we can judge on it, what's reasonable and what's not? And they're not really supposed to do that. So when the advice had originally come from the Attorney General that you could do it, he was completely right. It's just that they changed the law. So we've had the judiciary against us. We've had a load of politicians against us. We've had the media, the usual people, Gary Lineker, all these people, real, give him a intellectual geniuses, against us, and yet we've managed to get to where we are with the Conservatives with an amazing majority. Now,
this ought to be a movie. Brexit. Well, there is Brexit the movie, but this actual drama, Brexit 2, Son of Brexit. Well, Brexit meets Godzilla.
Yeah, well, with the Star Wars movie coming up, I do sort of sometimes think of the
Brexit, the Phantom Menace.
Well, it's like the referendum was A New Hope, and then we had the Empire, or the evil Empire, strikes back, and now we've got
return of the voter,
return of democracy, hopefully. So by the looks of it, we're going to be officially leaving the EU in about 6 weeks' time. Going into the transition period. As Mike, as you say, it looks like the withdrawal agreement is going to be slightly amended, not the withdrawal agreement, sorry, the withdrawal bill, to be slightly amended to say that the government cannot ask for an extension or cannot extend beyond the end of December. Of course, as you've mentioned there, Tim, technically speaking, the government could then go forth and pass an act which revokes that claim. So it could do it. But I think it's
more of a shot across the bow.
I think it is in reality, because it's going to focus the mind of the EU that, hey, we're happy to have no deal if necessary. At the end of December. So we better get cracking on this. I think one thing you've mentioned previously was that it would be a good idea if in February and March you had a series of, even if there were small trade deals with external parties set up, so you could just sign them. They wouldn't be able to come into force until the end of the transition period, but you could just sign them and then go, well, we're doing that.
Can you do that? I mean, I'm not sure. I thought that a member state wasn't even allowed to
That's
make
correct.
overture. Not even allowed to prepare a trade deal until you'd left.
So I'm sure that's legally correct.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that anyone can do anything they want to behind closed doors.
Yes.
So they
yes.
it would be improper to announce them before 12:01 a.m. on the 1st of February.
Yes.
But at 12:02, there's no reason to say we've just had the New Zealand High Commission round
on the phone.
Yeah.
Or round for tea.
And in the last minute, he signed this 800-page trade agreement. And almost the comedic value of that, I think, could have a clarifying effect on the EU.
Yeah, they're fond of steamrolling people with hundreds and thousands of pages of verbiage. So it'd be quite interesting to see some going the other way.
Yeah, definitely. So hopefully they'll get the hint, and well, they seem to be moving in the right direction by putting that into the bill. So we probably need to wrap this up a little bit. So what are you really looking forward to in 2020, Tim?
What am I looking forward to? Well, I'm looking forward to us going. I really am looking forward to us going. I think it's just going to be, it's just the best thing. There will be some economic shocks, but actually it's interesting to put those into perspective. If we look back to the time of the referendum, there was this beautiful moment when there were representatives from the Treasury on the Andrew Neil show, and they were saying that of course if we left that hundreds of thousands of jobs would be lost overnight and all this kind of thing. And then Andrew Neil actually flashed up on screen the Treasury's own figures, which showed this kind of like minimal little dip. And then after 12 months, actually, us being better off than before, and to actually and showed it after he'd let them go on and then ambushed them with that. It was a priceless televisual moment. I think Andrew Neil was an absolute hero over that, and he ambushed a couple of other people as well. He ambushed George Osborne. He ambushed Harriet Harman, I think, in similar ways. And I think that, yes, we are going to see similar stuff like this. We are going to see some economic shocks. We are going to see some changes. We are going to see a change in the shape of the economy. We are going to see markets becoming available that weren't available. We are going to be. I mean, if we look back on by the way, on how we used to before the EU, we used to get things like fruit from like Omaha, from China, from all manner of different places. We get New Zealand lamb and butter. We do all these kind of things, and I can remember those things absolutely escalating in price. Of course, when we joined the EU because of the common agricultural policies, price fixing stuff that goes on. Things are going to become more expensive, and they're going to become much cheaper as well. And we're going to. There is a lot of change going to go. There are some people going to lose some jobs, by the way, and I think there's a massive number of new jobs that are going to be created, of course, as our industry change direction, and so on, as we become more globally directed than we currently are. I think it's and of course there is the fact that there is this dosh that the Office of Budget Responsibility that they came out with, that was it 350 million whatever it was figure that they came out with, the Office of Budget Responsibility at the time. There is the fact that this money won't be being paid to the EU anymore. The net difference is going to be less because, as we know, about 100 million of it comes back every week. So it'll be about 250 million. But that will be interesting to see how that gets used. It might just be used strategically. It might just be used, to subsidise things that become more expensive as a result of being outside of the EU and so on. Who cares? Just economic survival and then economic prosperity. That's all we're concerned about, solving problems.
You mentioned some job losses there, and I think it's hill sheep farmers' lamb and lamb that's 167% tariff from outside the EU, and we could subsidise them for a bit. If at the end of the day your industry requires 167% tariff to function, and that's 167% that poor working families need to pay.
Is this for buying it from the EU?
Yeah, buying it, external to the EU.
Okay.
So,
but of course, we are in a global economy. Hello, we can just get it from somewhere else.
And what the impact will be people, hill farmers in this country, not being able to sustain against exports from abroad or export to the EU tariff-free once we leave. Yeah. But if your industry only works with that sort of tariff barrier, probably time to change industry.
Yeah, there's something wrong.
Now, there is £200 million a week to subsidise transition. Yeah. Let's certainly don't want to be heartless about this. You want to give people the opportunity to re-skill and whatever it might be. But, if we've got industries here that can't trade up to world competition, why should they be punishing the consumer?
Yeah, they need to go. But and also, the common agricultural policy has distorted. Now there's the thing. There will be shocks, and it will take adjustment. Just as there was an enormous amount of adjustment took place when we joined the EU, and that is that with farming subsidies, a lot of them did an enormous amount of harm to farming. It put an enormous number of farmers out of work. It benefited a small number of rich farmers and was very punitive to poor farmers. There's the fishing rights. Now there's one. There's a big deal for a start. Of course, how we lost all our fishing grounds to the EU. It was a massive ecological disaster because of not only the fact that it was overfished, but how it was overfished. And so on with the quotas that they had, but that were such that somebody would put a net over the side, pull up a load of fish, which of course kills the fish, and then no, because of the quota we can't have these fish. We've got to chuck them back, all dead. All of those kind of horrors. People, Scottish fishermen, being there's subsidies, given money to burn their boats. And given poor compensation for basically being thrown out of their industry. All that needs, and then how long will it take us for our fishing fleets to grow again, to be able to exploit them and so on? It will take time, but hey, all of these things can happen now. And how wonderful it will be.
Investment tip for 2020, and I'm keen to emphasise to anyone hearing, I'm not qualified to make an investment tip.
Yes.
But fishing ports and ports on the Atlantic-facing side of Britain strike me as the potential high growth spots 2020 and beyond. It's less the southeast, because that's been the growth spot for many years. That's probably at a limit, and we're likely to see less new business with the continent, and we're going to see more business out of Glasgow, Liverpool, Southampton, and that side of the country. If someone was looking to start up a business, that would seem to be the area to focus on.
I mean, certainly if you want to encourage people in Liverpool to work by providing them with opportunities for work, maybe you turn Liverpool into a free port.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that would obviously that's going to encourage economic activity there, and maybe they'll stop voting Labour. Yeah. So, but everyone's a winner. But as you say, Mike, the Atlantic side of Great Britain certainly suffered over the past 40 years, probably more so than the North Sea and obviously the Channel, where lots of activity's been going on. That's probably all we've got time for, but
we've covered some ground tonight, haven't we?
And we're certainly all looking forward very much to a very prosperous 2020.
Definitely.
Outside the European Union.
Yeah.
But thanks again, Tim, for agreeing to speak to us and having this lovely chat with us. But obviously for providing us with that wonderful intro and outro music. Much
you're very
appreciated.
welcome.
And just really to sum up, say Merry Brexmas.
Oh yeah, lovely. Yeah, Merry Brexit.
Merry Brexit.